My name is Claire Hamilton. I buried my sister Ellie last Tuesday, and by Friday I was left standing alone in the pouring rain of Seattle's airport, ghosted by my own mother and brother. I walked home through the darkness alone. What happened next and how I ended up in the hospital will take your breath away. Before I share everything, I want to know, where are you watching this video from? Let me know in the comments. It helps more than you know. I could still feel the cold where Ellie used to be. They'd closed her casket only 2 hours before I arrived at the airport terminal. Seattle's winter had no mercy. Rain came sideways, soaked through my funeral dress, and pooled inside my boots as I pulled out my phone. One message to Mom. Landed. Another to my brother, Ian. Can you pick me up? Flight came early. No replies. Not even the gray delivered bubble. At first, I told myself they were just stuck in traffic or maybe had bad signal. But the longer I stood under those flickering fluorescent lights, suitcase at my feet, soaked to the bone, the more reality started to rot at the edges of my hope. They weren't coming. Not late. Not delayed. Just not coming. My phone screen eventually dimmed in my hand, the way people's faces had at the funeral, distant, politely sad, but already slipping away from the grief like it was contagious. I'd held Ellie's eulogy alone. No family by my side. No mother to wipe her tears, no brother to steady my voice, just me. And a room full of chairs arranged like it was a performance. I texted again, please. I can't afford a rideshare, nothing. No typing bubbles, no read receipts, just silence. By the time airport security began circling and hinting that the benches weren't meant for overnight stays, I gave up. I dragged my suitcase out into the blackened suburbs, every wheel snagging on wet leaves and sidewalk cracks, and I walked. Past shuttered gas stations and ghost-lit crosswalks. Past hollow houses where warm lights blinked from kitchen windows like someone was waiting, just not for me. I wasn't afraid of the dark. I wasn't afraid of strangers. I was afraid of knowing this was what I meant to my family. Somewhere behind me, footsteps echoed. Steady. Close. I stopped breathing for a moment, turning slowly, heart racing. But when I looked, there was no one there. Just my own shadow lengthening under the street lamp. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Not by a person, but by a question that had lived under my skin since Ellie got sick. Why didn't they love us the same? Our mother never liked Ellie. She said it with her silences, with her absence. Ellie was always too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. But Ellie wasn't too much. She was just the only one who ever noticed when I was hurting, and now she was gone. The rain didn't stop, but I did, finally, at a cracked wooden gate that hadn't been opened in years, our childhood house. The place Ellie begged me to come back to before she died. Her voice had trembled when she asked me, "Just visit once, Claire, after when I'm not there anymore." Well, I was here now, alone, soaked, shivering, and carrying the weight of a sister's memory no one seemed to want but me, and that was just the beginning. The gate moaned as I pushed it open, dragging my suitcase behind me like a weight I didn't remember packing. The garden was gone, just weeds now. Tangled, tall, and wet enough to soak my legs as I made my way to the porch. The once white steps were moss-covered, slick under my boots. I paused, one hand on the rusted doorknob, the other wiping rain from my face. It felt wrong, entering this house without Ellie. The key still worked. That somehow hurt the most. Inside, the air hit me like breath held too long, stale, sour, tinged with mildew and old wood. I didn't turn on the lights at first. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd see or what I wouldn't. The house was a time capsule, but one left uncared for. Wallpaper peeling in the corners, dust on every surface. A mildew stain crawling down the living room ceiling. I dropped my suitcase in the entryway with a thud that echoed far too loudly. No reply. No warm light. No Ellie calling my name. I was home. Whatever that meant now. It wasn't the first time I'd been here since I moved out, but it was the first time since Ellie. Since everything. I walked through the rooms in the dark, remembering where we used to play, where we used to hide when Mom and Dad were fighting. I even touched the dented spot on the hallway wall where Ellie once flung her hairbrush at the door after Mom called her, a mistake made too late. I used to think that was a cruel thing to say. Now, I think it was her version of honesty. I finally turned on the kitchen light. It buzzed and blinked like it wasn't sure it wanted to wake up. The tiles were cracked. There was a dead fly in the sink. A spider web in the corner stretched from the old coffee maker to the cabinets. I reached for my phone just out of instinct, but the screen was still blank. No messages, no calls, no apologies, Nothing from Mom, nothing from Ian. Maybe they thought if they ignored me long enough, I'd disappear like Ellie did. But grief doesn't vanish when ignored. It festers, it grows mold. I checked the fridge. Empty, save for a rotting apple and a bottle of expired mustard. The electricity was still on thanks to Ellie's planning. She'd put me on the utility account when she got her diagnosis. Just in case, she'd whispered with a tired smile. I remember how fragile her hands looked when she signed that paperwork. She knew, even if we didn't say it. The guest room was the cleanest. Ellie had always kept it tidy, like she believed someone might come visit one day. She never gave up hope, not even when Mom stopped returning her calls. I pulled back the sheets and sat on the edge of the mattress, still in my funeral clothes, unsure whether to cry or scream. Instead, I stared at the old photo frame on the nightstand. Us. On the swing set out back. I must have been 6, she was 9. Ellie was smiling, wide and fearless. I was clinging to her side, eyes closed, trusting her to keep me safe. She always did. The heater clicked on with a groan. The room warmed, but my chest didn't. I hadn't eaten since morning. I had no idea where the nearest grocery store was anymore. I didn't have the energy to go find out, so I just lay down. On the bed, Ellie used to make up for guests that never came. I wrapped myself in a dusty quilt and waited. Not for sleep, not for dreams. Just for something that would tell me I wasn't wrong to come back here. Maybe for Ellie. Maybe for closure. Maybe for the version of myself who still believed family meant something. By morning, the silence in the house wasn't comforting. It was deafening. I'd thought sleep would help, but it hadn't found me. Instead, I'd stared at the cracked ceiling until gray daylight spilled in through the blinds, then peeled myself off the mattress like a guest overstaying her welcome in a place she used to call home. I went to the kitchen and found the cleaning supplies Ellie used to stash under the sink. The bottles were half empty and smelled like memories. I tied my hair up with one of her old bandanas, still in the drawer, faded pink, and got to work. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. This house was hers. Now it was mine. That meant something, didn't it? I started with the living room. The floorboards creaked like they were complaining, the windows fogged up from years of breathless mourning. I pulled back the old curtains, cracked open the windows, and let the freezing Seattle air rush in. It hurt, but it also reminded me I was still alive. There was mold along the baseboards. Dust coated every surface. I scrubbed until my arms ached, vacuumed until the machine begged me to stop, and opened every cabinet to clear out expired food and forgotten grief. By noon, I checked my phone again. Nothing. Not a single text. No, did you make it okay? No, how's the house? Not even from Ian. I tossed the phone face down on the counter and returned to scrubbing. If they didn't care whether I was breathing, I'd give them something to ignore. Progress. Strength. A version of myself that didn't need their apology anymore. I spent the rest of the day airing out the rot, literally and emotionally. Ellie would have laughed if she saw me trying to patch the broken kitchen window with duct tape and plastic wrap. I used to tease her for being too sentimental about this place, but now I understood. She never stopped believing the house could be saved, that love could return to it. I wanted to believe that too, at least enough to keep moving. By the end of the second day, my hands were raw. My back screamed. My knees had permanent dust marks. But the house smelled less like death and more like lemon-scented cleaner, like someone had finally remembered to come home. I stepped outside to dump a trash bag into the old metal bin and checked my phone one last time, foolishly hoping. Still nothing. Meanwhile, Instagram was alive with smiles from brunches, latte art, and my mother posing on a beach boardwalk with a wide straw hat and that signature detached smile she always wore like perfume. Caption: much needed escape healing peace ocean therapy. My sister had been in the ground for 72 hours. No mention of her. No black ribbon emoji. Not even a quote or a condolence, just peace without us. My throat tightened. I refreshed Ian's page. Golf selfies. Beer with the guys. Hashtag grindset. Not a single word about Ellie. Not a single acknowledgement that I was here, rebuilding the very house they once lived in, breathing in the silence they left behind. I sat on the porch, still gripping my phone like it could give me answers, and felt something shift inside me. Grief I knew well, but this was fury. They didn't just forget me, they erased her. And that I couldn't forgive, so I took a picture, just one, of my hands, bruised and dirty, clutching a sponge against the broken porch step. Then I posted it. No filter, No caption, just the truth. A girl alone, trying to hold together what her family chose to abandon. That night I didn't sleep either, but for the first time I didn't feel weak because of it. The weather turned on the third morning. Blue skies, sharp sunlight that made the dust sparkle like something holy. I stared at it through the cracked kitchen window, wondering if it was some kind of cosmic joke. Sunlight always feels a bit cruel after grief, too bright, too indifferent. I'd cleared most of the inside by then, but the outside still loomed. Gutters clogged, shingles warped, porch steps splintered. Ellie once told me the house was tired, like it had been holding its breath for too long. I understood that now. Everything creaked under the weight of waiting. I should have called someone. I should have asked for help. But I was still too proud, or maybe just too used to doing it all myself. So I grabbed a ladder from the garage and climbed onto the roof. The shingles were warped like waves, curling up at the edges like they were trying to escape. I moved slowly, balancing on my knees, trying to press down and nail them flat one by one. The rhythm calmed me, tap, hold, breathe, tap. I was halfway across the porch roof when I heard the crack. It wasn't loud, just enough to make me freeze. Then the wood gave way. My body dropped straight through it like a puppet with its strings cut. There wasn't time to scream, just air, splinters, and a single thought slicing through my brain like lightning. This is how my family will find me. Broken, alone, and they'll still pretend it's not their fault. Then blackness. When I came to, I wasn't dead. I was in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and fluorescent lights. My first thought was Ellie. For a moment, I thought maybe I was back in the hospice wing with her, watching machines blink and nurses shuffle in soft shoes. But then the pain hit. My back, my hip, my wrist wrapped tight in a splint. My face felt bruised from the fall and the tears that followed. I blinked up at the white ceiling and tried to remember how I got here. And that's when I saw her. A woman, small and elegant, sitting in the corner with a knit shawl over her shoulders and a thermos cradled in her lap. Mrs. Rivas. The neighbor across the street. I hadn't seen her in years, decades, really, but she hadn't changed. Her silver hair was still in a neat bun, her lipstick was still cherry red, and her gaze was just as sharp. "You always were a climber," she said softly. "But roofs, Claire, really?" I tried to laugh, but it came out more like a wince. "I didn't think anyone was watching," I managed. She raised an eyebrow. "I'm always watching." Then she stood, walked to the side of the bed, and poured something from the thermos into a paper cup. "I saw you fall, called 911, rode with you in the ambulance," she said, like it was just another item on her to-do list. "They said you'll be sore but lucky, no broken spine, just bruises, a sprained wrist, and a concussion." "Great," I whispered. "I'll add it to my scrapbook of disasters." She handed me the cup, lukewarm chamomile tea. "You always were dramatic, too, like your sister." The mention of Ellie punched the air out of my lungs. "She talked about you, you know," Mrs. Rivas continued. "Told me you'd come back one day, said the house needed you." I stared into the tea, too exhausted to cry. "She was the only one who saw me," I murmured. Mrs. Rivas didn't argue. She just reached over and squeezed my fingers gently. "You're not invisible, Claire, not to everyone." I swallowed hard, my throat burning. "Thank you," I said, barely more than a breath. "For what?" "For seeing me, I guess." She gave a quiet smile. "Anytime, mi niña." And then, for the first time in days, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel since Ellie's funeral. Not hope, not peace, just not alone. The hospital clock ticked louder than it had any right to. I was alone again, except for the soft rhythm of a machine monitoring my pulse and the occasional murmur of nurses in the hallway. I'd been cleared for discharge by the end of the day, but no one had come to pick me up. I hadn't even bothered calling. Why keep trying when you've already been forgotten? The bruises along my side ached every time I shifted. My wrist was swollen and wrapped like a pity gift, and I could feel the stiffness settling into my hip where I'd landed. It hurt to move, but it hurt more to sit still and scroll through my phone. Still no calls, no texts, no missed anything from my mother or Ian. I wanted to believe maybe they didn't know I'd been hospitalized. But Mrs. Rivas had told me the EMTs mentioned they'd tried to reach my emergency contacts. Both were listed under Mom and Ian with the same numbers I'd used since college. They'd chosen not to answer. I was one bad fall away from dying on that porch roof, and they couldn't even be bothered to tap their phones. That silence was louder than the crash. Mrs. Rivas returned that afternoon, this time carrying a small plastic container of soup, still warm. "Chicken and rice," she announced. Real rice, not that instant nonsense. You need something in you before they kick you out. I don't want to be a burden, I mumbled, trying to sit up straighter. You already fell through a roof, she said with a shrug. You've earned a few spoonfuls of kindness. She spoon-fed me at first, when she saw how I struggled with my dominant wrist wrapped like a mummy. I wanted to protest, to tell her I was fine, but there was something grounding in being cared for, even in the most basic way. I used to watch you and Ellie from my window, you know, she said as she refilled the plastic spoon. She'd boss you around the garden. You'd pretend to hate it, but you always listened. A small smile tugged at my lip. Ellie was the ringleader. She used to tell me we were planting hope under the hydrangeas. Mrs. Rivas chuckled. Well, the weeds don't lie. Maybe hope is overdue for a trim. The air shifted then, less heavy, less clinical. More like an afternoon visit between old friends, though I hadn't realized I needed one. She told me how she'd lived across the street for 32 years, raised 2 sons, lost her husband to cancer, and how Ellie had once brought her cookies during chemo unprompted just because she saw her looking tired. She had that kind of heart, Mrs. Rivas said quietly, spoon resting still in her hand. The kind that noticed things others missed. I nodded, blinking fast. She deserved better. So do you, she replied without hesitation. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But the truth of that moment felt too tender to hold on to. Because if I deserved better, why was I sitting here in a hospital bed alone? I keep thinking maybe I did something wrong, I said. Maybe they have a reason for leaving me. Maybe I was too much like Ellie. Mrs. Rivas shook her head slowly, placing the soup container on the tray beside me. You are not the problem, Claire. You never were. People who don't know how to carry love often drop it where it hurts most. That stayed with me, even after she left. Even after the nurse came in with my discharge papers. Even as I wheeled myself out to the hospital entrance with my overnight bag awkwardly slung across one shoulder and no one waiting at the curb. I was alone, but not invisible. Mrs. Rivas had seen me. Ellie had loved me. And maybe that was enough to start from. The first few hours home from the hospital were quiet, not peaceful, not comforting, just quiet in that way that made every floorboard creak sound like it was announcing my loneliness. I lowered myself slowly onto the couch, careful not to jolt my bruised hip, and exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding since the hospital doors shut behind me. I'd been discharged with a bottle of pain meds, a cheap wrist brace, and a reminder to take it easy, as if that were ever an option in this house. It still smelled like lemon cleaner and damp history. The repairs I'd started now looked like battle scars, proof of effort without applause. I spent the first evening scrolling through Instagram like I was studying a different species. My family was still vacationing in their own reality. Mom with her signature mimosa smile, Ian at a rooftop party with the caption, "Family first, always." I laughed. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd it stopped being painful for a second. No messages, no missed calls, but then something strange happened. At first, it was just a few DMs, strangers, women mostly, some with usernames like at Strength After Silence or at Heartwork, home. The messages were short and kind. I saw the video, you're not alone. Your strength is incredible. I'm so sorry your family failed you. I don't know you, but I see you. Keep going. Video. I clicked the first link someone sent me and it opened to TikTok. There I was, lying unconscious on a gurney, rain soaking my clothes. EMTs loading me into an ambulance. A soft voice narrating. She fell through the roof fixing her sister's house. Alone, abandoned, but not broken. I recognized the voice immediately. Mrs. Rivas. She defilmed the aftermath discreetly, respectfully, but the message was clear. Her video was stitched together with clips of the house, the overgrown yard, the broken porch awning, and even one frame of my hands, scraped and bruised from cleaning. The title. The brave girl who rebuilds alone. At the bottom, her family never showed up, but maybe we can. My throat tightened. The video had over 2.3 million views. Comments were flooding in faster than I could read them. How do we help her? This made me cry. I want to donate supplies. Is there a GoFundMe? Shame on her family. This girl is everything. I sat there, motionless, watching the number climb. And for the first time in days, my phone buzzed with something other than silence. Emails, messages, shares. An old college friend sent a voice note. Claire, I just saw a video of you trending on TikTok. Are you okay? My childhood piano teacher emailed me. If I'd known you were back in town, I would have brought cookies. What can I do? My hands shook. I wasn't used to being seen. Especially not like this, vulnerable, half-broken, a symbol for something I hadn't intended to represent. I should have felt embarrassed, but instead I felt something else. Relief, not because the world suddenly cared, but because someone had noticed what my own mother couldn't bother to text about. I called Mrs. Rivas that night. I didn't ask you to, I started, half apologizing, half scared. She interrupted gently. You didn't need to ask, Mija. Sometimes stories tell themselves. Yours deserved to be heard. I covered my eyes with my good hand and let the tears come. I didn't think anyone would care. They do, she said, and more are coming. She was right. The next morning, I opened my door to find a box on the porch. Inside, tools, paint, gloves, a handwritten card. Your story moved us. We believe in you. My voice cracked when I whispered the only thing I could. Ellie, you were right. People can care. Even if they're strangers, the packages didn't stop. By day 3, I had to clear space on the front porch just to walk outside. Boxes stacked taller than the broken porch rail. Gloves, canned goods, power tools, handwritten notes, blankets. One woman from Oregon sent a quilt embroidered with the words, "You are not alone even when they leave." That one almost undid me. Mrs. Rivas came by daily, pretending it was just to check on me, but I knew she was monitoring my mental state as much as my bruised wrist. I didn't mind. It was comforting having someone who showed up without being asked. You've got a whole village watching now, she said as she helped me carry in another box. Might be time to start letting them in. Letting them in. Those words stuck in my head like a song I wasn't sure I knew the lyrics to. That same afternoon, the doorbell rang. Not a delivery, not a camera crew. A man, late 50s, tall, hands like he could bend steel. Wore jeans like he'd had them since the 90s and a flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows. Name S. Luke, he said, nodding. Retired contractor. My daughter showed me that video, said if I didn't offer to help, she'd disown me. Thought I'd start with your porch. It's about a sneeze away from collapse. I stared at him. I think I even forgot to blink. You're offering to fix my house? I asked, not quite trusting my own ears. He shrugged. Been building longer than some people have been alive. Got time, tools, and hands that don't like being idle. You got the guts to try. Figured we'd make a good team. I didn't say yes right away, because saying yes felt like admitting I needed help. But the porch was about to give out. And Ellie always said the foundation of a house says everything about the people who live in it, so I stepped aside. You're sure? I asked. I wouldn't be here if I was. Luke came back the next morning with a truck full of materials and a thermos of black coffee strong enough to strip paint. He whistled when he walked through the front door. This place is old, he said. But good bones. You ever see a woman rebuild a house before? Only in Hallmark movies, I replied dryly. He chuckled. Well, this won't be nearly as pretty, but it'll be real. And real it was. We started with the porch, tearing up rotted planks, measuring new ones, hammering in sync. Luke was a man of few words, but his silence was calm, not like the cold vacuum my family left behind. By noon, 2 more people showed up, a mother and daughter due from 2 towns over who saw the video and brought sandwiches and paint samples. I hope it's okay, the mother said. We just wanted to do something useful. I nodded, surprised I wasn't as uncomfortable as I thought I'd be. Yeah, that's more than okay. Over the next few days, more people arrived. Volunteers, students, retirees, women who had been through things I hadn't even found words for yet. Men who'd raised daughters and said, I'd hope someone would do this for her. They came with screwdrivers and scaffolding and pots of chili. And every time I tried to protest, Luke would cut me off with the same words. Let em help, you're not building alone anymore. It didn't feel like a project anymore. It felt like something sacred. Every hammer hit, every paint stroke. It wasn't just fixing wood and walls. It was rewriting the story of the house. Of Ellie, of me. One night after everyone had gone and the porch beams gleamed like new, Luke sat beside me on the top step. We sipped his strong coffee and watched the sun dip behind the trees. You remind me of my wife, he said after a long pause. She built everything back after cancer nearly took her. Not just the house, herself. You've got that same look. What look? I asked, startled. Like you've been broken just enough to know what strength actually feels like. I didn't reply, because for the first time I realized I wasn't just healing the house. I was healing something in me I thought had died with Ellie, and it was starting to look like hope. It was just after lunch on a Tuesday when the knock came. Not the kind you hear from a delivery driver or a neighbor dropping by. No, this knock had weight, polished, practiced, like the sound of someone trying to pretend they had every right to be there. I wiped my hands on a paint-streaked towel, glanced out the window, and nearly dropped the hammer I'd been holding. There, on the front lawn, stood my mother, flanked by Ian and my father. 3 perfect silhouettes posed like a magazine ad for family unity. Clean clothes, fresh haircuts, fake concern sculpted into every curve of their expressions. My mother was holding a bouquet of white lilies. Ian had a reusable grocery bag, probably filled with something just wholesome enough to be photographed. And my father, he wore that old navy cap he always pulled out when he wanted to look relatable. For a second, I froze, like my body didn't know whether to run or throw up. Then I stepped back slowly behind the curtain. They hadn't seen me yet. Luke, hammering floorboards on the side porch, noticed my change in posture. "You good?" he called, wiping his forehead. I turned to him, voice steady. "My family's here." He raised one eyebrow. "The same ones who ghosted you at the airport." I nodded once. He didn't ask another question, just quietly set down his tools and walked into the house, giving me space. I watched them through the window as they adjusted their positions, clearly stalling for dramatic effect. My mother fluffed the bouquet. Ian looked directly into the camera lens of his phone before slipping it into his pocket. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about me. It wasn't even about Ellie. It was about damage control, because people were watching now, because sympathy had shifted, because for once they were the villains in someone else's story and that didn't suit them. I didn't open the door. I simply walked to the window, pulled aside the curtain, and looked directly at them. No wave, no smile. My mother caught my eye and immediately launched into what I could only describe as a performance. She clutched the flowers like they were oxygen. Ian put a hand on her shoulder. My father mouthed something I couldn't quite read, but the sentiment was unmistakable. "Let us back in." I didn't move, didn't flinch. I wanted them to feel that silence, to choke on the same kind they'd handed me at the airport, at the funeral. Through every day I'd scrubbed rot out of this house alone. Then, gently, without breaking eye contact, I stepped back and locked the door. I watched as the smiles on their faces faltered, watched as the lilies drooped slightly in my mother's arms, watched as Ian's hand fell away from her shoulder and his posture stiffened with frustration. My father was the last to move, but even he shifted like a man realizing the stage lights weren't as warm as he'd hoped. They stood there another minute, waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. I stood tall. Let them stare. Let them wonder. Let them squirm. Eventually, they turned away, back to their car, back to the version of the story where they could pretend this had just been a misunderstanding. But I knew better now. They weren't there to apologize. They were there to reclaim control, to make this moment about them, to rewrite the narrative with camera-ready grief and family reunion hashtags. As their car pulled out of the driveway, I felt no guilt, only clarity, and the quiet click of a door that would not be opening again. That night, I sat on the rebuilt porch steps with Luke's old work gloves in my lap and my phone clutched in my hand like it might bite. My family hadn't posted anything about their little visit, but I knew it was coming. They stood on my lawn like they were filming a scene. I wouldn't be surprised if they'd scheduled a photo dump for peak engagement. My DMs were still flooded. People asking how to help, sharing stories, offering everything from food to flooring. A woman from Maine had messaged me. "You gave me the courage to file for divorce. I haven't felt strong in years." But as the stars blinked alive over the Seattle sky, what I kept thinking about were the lies. The way a family can smile for a camera while privately treating you like you're disposable. The way forgiveness gets weaponized, expected, demanded, even when the wound still bleeds. I opened the Notes app and started writing. Not for the algorithm, not for the sympathy, but for Ellie. And for every woman who'd been handed silence and told to swallow it like it was medicine. Post, they showed up today, with flowers and polite smiles, with clean clothes and cameras tucked in their pockets. They hadn't come to the funeral, didn't return my texts from the airport, didn't even know I was in the hospital. But today, when the porch was rebuilt, when the paint dried, when the internet cared, they came. Not for me, for them, to be seen doing the right thing. This is what happens when public shame touches people who are used to private power. They wanted forgiveness like it was a photo op. But here's the truth. Forgiveness without accountability is just performance. I'm not interested in rehearsals anymore. I've spent the last 2 weeks alone in the house my sister died thinking no one would care about. I scrubbed her memory out of the floors, aired her hope out of the curtains, hammered dignity into these broken walls. And in the absence of family, strangers became a lifeline. Your kindness saved me, your letters, your donations, your offers to help rebuild what they abandoned. But here's what I want most now. I want women everywhere to know that walking away from people who refuse to see you is not cruelty. It's clarity. You don't owe forgiveness to those who only show up when they're being watched. You owe yourself peace. Ellie, I hope you see this. I'm finally learning what you always knew. We weren't broken. We were just inconvenient to people who never deserved us. I hit post and waited, but I didn't wait long. Within minutes, it was being shared, commented, quoted, screenshotted. Forgiveness without accountability is just performance. You don't owe peace to people who only show up when they're being watched. It rippled out like I'd thrown a stone into the stillest lake. Women, hundreds of them, began replying, some with tears, some with rage, all of them carrying the same wound in different shapes. My sister called me selfish after I got sober and stopped funding her. My parents said I was dramatic for going no contact. Thank you for making me feel seen. I left my abusive ex 2 months ago. No one believed me until I started telling the truth out loud. I read every single one. And for the first time since Ellie died, I didn't feel like I was treading water in the dark. I was swimming towards something. A woman messaged me from North Carolina. You ever think about building something bigger? An app, a network? We could help each other for real. I stared at that message long after the others blurred. Bigger, not just survival, maybe something lasting, maybe legacy. The idea started in a message. One line, casual but full of spark. You ever think about building something bigger? I read it twice. Then again. By that point, my public post had been shared across every platform I had. It made the rounds in women's forums, Facebook groups for domestic survivors, and even found its way onto morning show roundups. I'd become, unwillingly, a face for something much more universal. And honestly, that terrified me. But it also thrilled me. Because maybe, just maybe, the story didn't have to end with a single viral video or a porch built by kind hands. Maybe it could become something other women could hold in their own palms, something they could tap into when they felt forgotten, something that made asking for help feel less like weakness and more like power. I opened a blank document on my laptop and typed the words, Hearth Help, home isn't just a place, it's a right. That night I called Luke. Got a minute? I asked. Only if it's for more coffee, he deadpanned. I laughed, my first real laugh in days. I'm starting something, a service, an app eventually, something to connect women who live alone or are rebuilding to trusted professionals. Plumbers, electricians, contractors, all vetted, background checked. People who won't overcharge them, people who won't make them feel small. There was a pause on the other end. You want me to be your first hire? If you're willing. He didn't even hesitate. Thought you'd never ask. By the end of the week, I had a name, a logo, thanks to a generous volunteer who happened to be a graphic designer, and a simple landing page. Hearth Help was born in the very same living room I used to sit in as a child, terrified of the shouting behind the walls. Now, it felt like I'd taken back every inch of that fear and traded it for purpose. The media caught on faster than I expected. At first, it was just a few local blogs. Then a regional morning show reached out for a segment. The woman who turned her grief into a grassroots startup. They sent a camera crew. I almost said no. But Luke told me, this isn't about them seeing you, it's about them seeing what's possible. So I did the interview, talked about Ellie, talked about the fall, talked about the silence, and the voices that broke through it. I kept my voice steady when I said, no one should have to trade their safety to feel independent. Hearth Help exists because women deserve to live without fear, without debt, and without being ignored. By the following week, we had over 4,000 signups for early access. Volunteers offered admin support, legal help, and even office space. One woman from Detroit messaged me, I'm a licensed plumber. Put me on your list, I'm in. Another from Montana, I've got my own carpentry business. I know what it's like to be underestimated. Let's change that. Luke and I set up a tiny workspace in what used to be Ellie's bedroom. Her shelves still held her old gardening books and a cracked snow globe she'd always loved. I think she'd be proud, I whispered one afternoon as we unpacked donated laptops onto a makeshift desk. Luke nodded, handing me a coffee. She'd probably tell you to put in better insulation first. I smiled, and it felt like something in the house smiled back. Hearth Help wasn't just a startup. It was Ellie's spirit in motion. It was every woman who'd been ghosted, gaslit, underquoted, or left behind, finding a way back to themselves. And the best part, we were just getting started. It was a clip someone tagged me in. I wasn't watching TV. I rarely did anymore, not since the silence of this house had become more sacred than background noise. But the moment I saw the thumbnail, my stomach twisted. A studio set, soft lighting, my mother's face behind a sheen of tears, Ian seated beside her, lips pressed in solemn restraint, and my father, always the anchor in their image of stability, wearing a blue blazer and the same navy cap he'd worn to every graduation and holiday dinner. The headline ran across the screen in neat white font. A family's regret. Exclusive interview with the Hamiltons on losing a daughter in almost a second. I didn't press play right away. I sat on the edge of Ellie's old bed, laptop open, fingers trembling. Not with fear, not exactly. With the exhaustion of watching people who'd never lifted a hand to help now suddenly lifting microphones instead. When I did finally watch, the performance was everything I'd expected and worse. My mother dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "We were in shock," she said, voice wavering just enough to sound sincere. "Losing Ellie, it changed us. We didn't know how to reach out to Claire. We were grieving in our own way." Ian chimed in. "We didn't abandon her. That's just how it looked." And my father, quiet for most of it, finally leaned forward, looking straight into the camera. "She was our daughter, still is, and we want her to come home." I stared at the screen like I was watching strangers. Because that's what they were now, not family, not even enemies, just strangers desperate to control a narrative they'd never cared to be part of until it became public. The next morning, the interview was everywhere. Clips reposted, tears meme-ified, sympathy rolling in for them now. A producer from a national talk show emailed me. "We'd love to have you on for your response. Millions are watching, your voice matters." And I stared at that email like it had been sent to the wrong woman. Because here's the thing. I'd already said what I needed to say. Not with cameras, not with tissue boxes placed just outside the frame, but with truth, with work, with the sound of hammers and drills and people showing up without applause. The world may have loved a dramatic reunion. But I wasn't here for theatrics, I was here for healing. And healing isn't a performance, so I replied with one sentence, "No thank you." And then I posted this post. I saw the interview, I'm not surprised. My story has never been about revenge or spectacle. I've learned that some people only apologize when their image is at risk, not because they truly see the hurt they caused. I've also learned that healing doesn't require a stage, or an audience, or a manufactured moment of reconciliation. Sometimes healing is a locked door. Sometimes it's a soft no. Sometimes it's a porch built by strangers who became family when blood chose silence. To those asking me to go on TV and share my side, I already have. It's here. It's in the nails driven into these walls. It's in the app we launched. It's in every woman who decided her peace was worth protecting. I'm not going back, because I'm already home. I turned off my notifications after that. Let the whirlwind rage without me. Because the real story wasn't unfolding in studios or sound bites. It was happening here, where tools clanked, women built, and Ellie's favorite quote hung by the doorway in hand-painted letters. "Rise anyway." The city buzzed like it had something to prove. Downtown Seattle was glass and movement, elevators humming and people darting between crosswalks like they all had somewhere more important to be. For the first time in months, I wasn't holding a sponge, a hammer, or a roll of painter's tape. Instead, I was gripping a small note card and trying not to sweat through my blouse. The Women's Innovation Expo had asked me to speak, not about trauma, not about going viral, about building. "Share your journey," the event coordinator had said over the phone. "Tell them why you started Hearth Help, why it matters." It wasn't until I stepped into the convention center, saw rows of chairs and the Hearth Help banner projected behind a sleek stage, that I realized this was no longer about repair. This was about direction. Luke came with me, of course, wore a button-up instead of flannel, brought coffee and a silent nod of encouragement. Mrs. Rivas sent me with a jar of her homemade lemon balm in case my nerves got the better of me. And Ellie, I felt her in every step I took. I wore her bracelet on my wrist, the one engraved with her favorite quote, the one that had become the heartbeat of this entire journey. "Rise anyway." The room filled quickly. Dozens of women, founders, builders, survivors, dreamers. I scanned the crowd and saw faces that mirrored mine from a few months ago, unsure, bruised in invisible ways, but still upright. When they introduced me, I walked to the podium with steady legs. No teleprompter, just my voice and a story that had earned its place. "I'm not here to talk about pain," I began, a pause. "I've had enough of that. I imagine many of you have, too." Some nodded. A few smiled tightly. "I want to talk about what happens after the silence. After the fall, after the people you counted on don't show up." I held up the note card, then folded it in half and set it aside. "This house," I said, "the one you've seen on the news or in the background of that video, it wasn't just a project. It was a promise to myself, to my sister, to every woman who's ever asked, if I rebuild, will anyone care?" The room got still. I didn't start Hearth Help because I had a business plan. I started it because I had a broken wrist, a broken home, and no one to call. Laughter, gentle knowing. But then people showed up. Strangers, carpenters, moms with casseroles. Retired contractors who knew how to fix more than just foundation cracks. I looked toward Luke, who tipped his cup like a quiet toast. I realized something during those weeks. That sometimes community isn't the family you're born with. It's the one you build, plank by plank, person by person. A few eyes shimmered in the audience. Ellie believed in people, even when they hurt her, even when they disappeared. And when she left this world, she left me with that belief tucked into the walls of our childhood home. I placed a hand over my heart. She didn't get to see what Hearth Help became, but I think she knew. I think she always knew we rise strongest not when we're rescued, but when we're witnessed. I paused. Let the words land. So here I am, not as a woman with a perfect ending, but as someone who finally learned that healing doesn't mean going back, it means going forward, together. The applause was soft at first. Then it grew. Not thunderous, not performative, just real, earnest, human, exactly the kind of sound Ellie would have loved. Afterward, people approached me not as a speaker, but as a peer. They shared their own rebuilds, their bruises, their brave ideas. Women with notepads and hope, wanting to learn more, join the Hearth Help Network, offer their skills. One woman whispered, "I left a man who made me feel invisible. Your words, they helped me make that choice." I smiled through the lump in my throat because that was it. That was the purpose. Not revenge, not ratings, just change. And I was finally ready to live in it. A year can pass like a whisper, and somehow also like a storm. 12 months ago, I was standing alone in an airport, drenched in grief and rain. I had just buried my sister. I had no ride, no warmth waiting, no answers. Only silence where love should have been. Today, I stood in the morning sun with a bouquet of sunflowers in my hands. The cemetery was quiet, early enough that the city hadn't begun its hum. A light breeze rustled through the evergreens lining the gravel path, and I let it guide me as I walked toward the grave with Ellie's name etched into stone. I brought sunflowers because she once told me they were the rebellious flowers, always leaning toward the light, even if it meant growing sideways. She would have liked that idea. I knelt beside her, brushing a few leaves away from the marble slab. Someone had left a rock painted with a heart on it. Probably one of the local women in the community garden we'd helped fund last month. Hearth Help had expanded fast, faster than I ever imagined. Over 15,000 members, thousands of completed jobs, partnerships with nonprofits, a waiting list of tradespeople who actually believed in the mission. Luke was now overseeing a full training program for young apprentices, women looking to learn skilled trades. Mrs. Rivas still checked in every Friday with lemon tea and sarcastic wisdom. And me? I was finally living in the house I once feared would collapse with my grief. We dekept Ellie's room just the way it was, turned it into a planning hub for Hearth Help HQ. Her shelves now held portfolios from designers and blueprints for safe housing pilot programs. She would have made fun of the laminated flowcharts, but I knew she'd beam with pride. At her grave, I placed the sunflowers down slowly and traced her name with my fingers. "I hope you know," I whispered, "you weren't forgotten." I sat there longer than I planned, the kind of quiet visit that fills something instead of draining it. Then I unhooked the bracelet from my wrist, the one engraved with her favorite quote, "Rise anyway." I didn't leave it behind. I couldn't. But I kissed it gently and held it against the headstone like a vow. "Thank you," I said, voice breaking just enough to be honest. "You were always my real family." On the way back, I passed by a group of women tending to the public garden hearth help had built last fall. One of them waved. Another offered a container of lavender soap she'd made. "We always take care of our own," she said warmly. I smiled, because I wasn't alone anymore, and I wasn't invisible. I was home. Not just in the house I rebuilt, but in myself. If you've ever had to start over from the ashes, if you've ever found family in unexpected places or discovered your own strength through heartbreak, Claire's journey was for you. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for rising anyway. Tell me in the comments, what part of Claire's story stayed with you most? And if you're ready to share yours, I'm listening.